It's literally a cult on a boat in the middle of the ocean, away from all law and all order, and until it came ashore, we really had no idea how insidious it truly was. I am talking about the Sea Organization, a branch within Scientology. It's more commonly referred to as the Sea Org, and this entity within the Church of Scientology was established by L. Ron Hubbard in the late 1960s, and it's often portrayed as, the elite group of Scientologists who are the most dedicated to the advancements and preservation of Hubbard's teachings. However, its history, operations, and its internal practices have been obviously riddled with controversy, including allegations of really, really, really bad things. But luckily, also some stories of dramatic escapes. So today we are going to dive deep into this branch of Scientology. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post 1 or 2 videos on one of these topics every single week, and occasionally do a little reaction to some of the more crazy things that we see these influencers who are in the culty spiritual stratosphere kind of say, and then we debunk them / maybe poke a little bit of fun at them. I have talked about this before, but I get really, really severe anxiety. And when I'm a little snarky, even though it's my own true opinion and honest reaction, after I post it, I'm like, oh my God, was I a B word? Was I mean? Was it too much? Did I offend anybody? Because I don't want to negatively affect anything ever in my entire life. But I feel like I've just gotten a little bit stale. I just feel like I'm just sitting and reading. And I want to find that healthy balance between having a little snark and really showing more of my personality, but also providing you guys with a lot of great information and understanding and awareness. So let me know what you like. If you want me to just sit and tell it to you straight, happy to do that. If you like a little bit more personality, hopefully you do like my personality. Then please let me know down in the comments below. And without further ado, let's jump right into this video. The Sea Org was established in 1967. And by the mid-1960s, Hubbard was faced with mounting legal and public scrutiny because of Scientology and its strange teachings and practices. Governments in several countries were actually investigating Scientology, with accusations ranging from practicing medicine without a license to allegations of fraud. And as these pressures grew, Hubbard sought to find a way to maintain the control over Scientology while trying to, evade regulatory oversight. Sounds like a certain few billionaires that we're all aware of, I'm sure. So, L. Ron Hubbard's solution was to take to the seas a domain free from the jurisdiction of any single government in the world. So he purchased several ships, including the flagship ship, say that 6 times fast, Apollo, and founded the Sea Org as a maritime organization. Now, officially, the Sea Org's mission was to deliver advanced Scientology training and preserve the church's confidential materials and protect its spiritual technologies in quotes, obviously. Now, unofficially, the Sea Org became a tool for Hubbard to totally consolidate his authority, secure his writings, and avoid any legal entanglements. Hubbard envisioned the Sea Org as a religious order and likened it to the monastic traditions of self-discipline and service. Members were required to sign billion-year contracts, and this symbolized their eternal commitment to Scientology across not just their current lifetime, but also their future ones. Yeah, you have to sign an eternal commitment if you want to be a part of the Sea Org. So for those drawn to Scientology's promises of spiritual advancement, joining the Sea Org was seen as a profound honor and responsibility. However, this commitment came at a very, very steep price. We're talking an entire lifetime or multiple lifetimes of relentless unpaid labor, isolation, and subservience to the organization's hierarchy. Now, what about the familiar structure within the Sea Org? Because when I think about going and working, say, on like a cruise ship or people who are in the Navy, I envision one person from the family going out and having communication with their family who are still on shore. But in the Sea Org, families were rarely prioritized over the organization's overall mission. The culture of the Sea Org emphasized total devotion to Scientology above everything else, often at the expense of those familial bonds. Members were expected to dedicate their entire lives to advancing the church's objectives, and this obviously left little room for personal relationships, parenting, or any kind of traditional family dynamic. Sea Org members were encouraged to view their loyalty to the organization as paramount, often superseding their responsibilities to spouses, children, or even parents. Marriages were permitted within the Sea Org, but they were subject to the organization's intense work schedules and hierarchical demands. Couples were often separated for extended periods of time because members would be probably strategically assigned to different locations, or they were otherwise given demanding tasks that left very little time for nurturing their relationship. And as for children, well, they were particularly affected by the prioritization of the Sea Org's mission. Now, in the 1970s and 1980s, policies within the Sea Org actually began to discourage members from having children because raising a family was seen as incompatible with the rigorous demands of Sea Org life. Those who did become pregnant faced significant pressures to have abortions, as described by former members like Claire Headley. Members who chose to have children were often transferred out of the Sea Org or required to place their children in communal facilities that were still tied to Scientology itself, like something called cadet orgs, where they were raised with very minimal parental involvement. And as for life in general for children within the Sea Org, they were raised in environments that emphasized discipline and labor. They rarely saw their parents. Former members like Jenna Miscavige Hill, the niece of Scientology leader David Miscavige, and if all of this is going over your head, I did just release a full deep dive on Scientology right here, so please make sure you check that out because it has a ton of information. But I feel like I could make a million videos and still not cover everything here. But Jenna Miscavige also has a YouTube channel herself. I'll go ahead and link it down in the description below. She shares so much personal detail and information about the impact that this group had on her, so highly recommend. But anyways, she described growing up in communal housing as a place where emotional needs were totally neglected and education was minimal. So get this, instead of formal schooling, children were given tasks and responsibilities that were really similar to those of adult members because they were trained to contribute to the organization's operations at an early age. I mean, I mentioned in my previous video, children were not really considered to be children that you need to guide and care for. They're considered to be small adults that should do adult things and just are small. So they should work like adults. They should understand things like adults. They should be mindful like adults. It's absolutely insane. Now, Jenna Miscavige Hill recounted how her parents' roles within the Sea Org left them totally unavailable for a lot of her childhood. She and other children were taught to view the organization's mission as more important than their relationship to their parents or basically anybody else. And this kind of created a culture where any type of personal bond was always going to be secondary to Scientology because Scientology's mission was just so big. Now, let's say that your marriage starts to fall apart and thus your family starts to fall apart because Scientology has structured their organization to pull people away from the people that they love. So let's say that this is happening to you in your relationship and you decide to seek counseling. Well, counseling for marital problems typically involved Scientology auditing sessions, which were designed to redirect focus back into the organization rather than resolve or fixate on any personal issues. And if a couple decided to leave the Sea Org together, they faced significant challenges, including total disconnection from the church. I'm talking no one within the church will talk to you anymore because you'll be labeled an SP or a suppressive person. They experience financial instability because these people are making like 50 cents a week, which is absolutely abhorrent. So it just seemed to be easier for a lot of people to just stay in the organization. I mean, imagine being brought up in a cult like this. All you know are these teachings, and then you kind of see the layers begin to be peeled back, and you want to leave, but you have no money, no formal education. You have no understanding about what society looks like from the outside. It just would be so overwhelming, you might be inclined to stay. So many former members have spoken out about the long-term effects of a lot of these practices. Children who grew up in the Sea Org often struggled with feelings of abandonment and a lack of traditional familial support. And parents, in turn, faced guilt and regret for their inability to balance their roles as caregivers with their responsibilities to the organization. I mean, families within the Sea Org were consistently subordinated to the organization's goals. It was this emphasis on loyalty to Scientology above all else that led to these fractured relationships, emotional neglect, and really difficult choices for members to make because they wanted to maintain connection with their families. These practices have left lasting scars on many, many former members, especially if their loved one is still involved in Scientology. So what did daily life look like within the Sea Org? So the Sea Org was modeled after naval traditions, and the structure was very hierarchical, with ranks like Commodore, that's what Hubbard liked to call himself, and then other distinguished people were captain and lieutenant. So this structure isn't merely symbolic, but it serves as a tool of discipline and control. Order obviously flows from the top leadership, especially those people with those titles. So this order flow from top leadership was often referred to as command intention. And it went all the way down to the rank and file members who are expected to comply with whatever that messaging is without question. There was also a sense, and I'm sure you guessed it by now, there was this expectation of rigorous discipline and extreme demands. Members typically worked 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, with little to no time off. This is one of the pieces of the BITE model, the T, time control. And if you keep people exhausted and all they want is to get done and eat something and go to bed, they are way easier to control. Some of their tasks ranged from basic administrative duties and auditing sessions to menial labor such as cleaning, maintenance, and even construction. Many former members described the work as absolutely grueling, with the shifts often stretching into the early hours of the morning. So Jenna, reminder, she's the niece of Scientology leader David Miscavige, shared that her experience in Sea Org as a child was basically this haze of relentless work and isolation. She was tasked with scrubbing floors, cleaning bathrooms when she was just 6 years old, and she'd be separated from her parents for weeks or even months at a time. It is absolutely heartbreaking to hear that. Now, Jenna Miscavige Hill also has written a memoir called Beyond Belief, and it details the emotional toll that she experienced from being separated from her parents and basically raised in a system that forced her to be obedient and not discover or express any type of individuality. So highly recommend her book. Now, there's another former member named Astra Woodcraft, and she shared her experience in the Sea Org and described it as a life of strict discipline and an absence of any real affection. She ultimately left the church as a teenager, luckily, and said that the psychological impact of her upbringing was one of the reasons that she had to get out. And then we also have Marc Headley, another former member who spent 15 years in the church and described working 100-hour weeks under this constant pressure to meet production quotas. He said that members were forced to subsist on poor quality food while enduring verbal abuse from superiors. He also wrote a memoir called Blown for Good, and it details the pervasive fear of punishment, which would range from public humiliation to assignments to the infamous Rehabilitation Project Force, which we will jump into that one a little bit later. Now, this next part is a little bit of a trigger warning for child loss, so just take care of yourself, especially forced child loss. Now, Claire Headley revealed that she was coerced into having not just one, but multiple abortions while in the Sea Org. Why, you might ask? Well, obviously, anyone having a child, especially someone higher up in the chain of command, would distract that person from the real work that they're doing within Scientology. Claire even explained that pregnancy was seen as incompatible with the rigorous demands of the organization, and women who became pregnant were almost always pressured to terminate their pregnancies or face expulsion. Her story is echoed by other female defectors, many of whom have shared similar experiences of coercion and emotional trauma. So let's talk about some of the punishments for people that go against the lieutenants or captains of the Sea Org. A particularly chilling practice in the early years of the Sea Org was called overboarding. And this is what would happen when members who were accused of violations were literally thrown overboard from ships as a disciplinary measure. Yeah, they were literally thrown overboard, not told to walk the plank, but literally thrown overboard. These guys are literally like Timu pirates. It's like unbelievable the things that they did because they got a taste of power. Survivors like Hannah Whitfield, who was a former high-ranking Scientologist, even described the terror of being subjected to this punishment. She recounted how the practice was framed as a way to cleanse the individual of wrongdoing, and it obviously left a very lasting psychological scar to everyone who endured it. You're thrown into the ocean from a ship. Like, what? And as for a compensation for your labor and fear and barely your basic necessities even being met, guess what you get for a week? If you guessed $50 and you thought earlier when I mentioned that number that there was no way that that was the number, yes, they literally made $50 a week. Imagine working at a job for decades and you make $50 a week. No wonder it is so hard for people to escape this cult. I mean, obviously nobody in this day and age anyways can live off of these funds. And one might argue, well, they get food, they get housing. Yeah, at their work, there's no work-life balance. They're typically housed in dormitory-style accommodations with shared bathrooms. And of course, people described overcrowded living conditions with as many as 12 people crammed into a single room. After working 10 to 12 hours a day, I can only imagine how smelly this place was, because it's like, if you're working 12 to 16 hour shifts, I would just want to lay down and go to bed. I'm probably not even caring about taking a shower until it's utterly necessary. And I'm sure you were able to guess that communication with the outside world was obviously very tightly controlled, with all letters and phone calls monitored to ensure total loyalty to the organization. These people are utterly and completely isolated from everything and everyone they've ever known, even their family members. Now, how does anybody get involved in something like this? Well, it's very similar to a lot of other cults. The Sea Org promises a life of spiritual fulfillment and the opportunity to contribute to Scientology's global mission of clearing the planet and saving humanity. Potential recruits are told that their work will literally save the world. But the reality often diverges sharply from any of these promises. Now, once recruited, members find themselves under constant surveillance, subjected to intense pressure to meet productivity quotas, and bound by a web of rules that govern literally every aspect of their lives. Violations of these rules, even minor ones, can result in getting thrown off of a boat or another grueling disciplinary program called the Rehabilitation Project Force. I gave you a little bit of a teaser earlier, but let's jump in because it is one of the most controversial programs within the Sea Org. Now, it's presented publicly by Scientology as a voluntary rehabilitation program for members who have fallen short of those organizational standards or who have committed infractions. The RPF is described by critics and former members as a punitive and coercive system designed to enforce compliance and submission. Members could be assigned to the RPF for a variety of reasons, ranging from perceived inefficiency or failure to meet their work quotas, all the way to questioning leadership or expressing even an utterance of dissent. Even minor infractions, such as speaking critically about a superior or making any mistake in your work assignments, could result in placement in the program. So, officially, RPF was meant to give individuals a chance to atone for their errors and prove their loyalty to the organization. But it's actually a mechanism of control and punishment. So once assigned to the RPF, participants were segregated from the general Sea Org population and required to wear distinct black boiler suits to signify their lower status. Communication with others was heavily restricted, where members were often forbidden to speak unless spoken to first. And of course, the living conditions were harsh and austere, with individuals housed in once again overcrowded dorms or other isolated facilities. And if you thought it was just them being isolated in some room, nope. They got to do manual labor. Tasks would include scrubbing desks, cleaning sewage systems, hauling heavy materials, or even performing physically exhausting construction work. Meals were very meager and frequently composed of the leftover food from the rest of the Sea Org. Sleep deprivation was often common too, with members only allowed to rest a couple of hours a night before being required to resume their tasks. It's weird because to me, I'm like, that sounds like the cult itself. What's the real differentiation? Like less sleep? Well, there were some more psychological pressures within the RPF. They were expected to undergo regular security checks or auditing sessions that were conducted to force confessions out of these people. They were very, very invasive questions and often humiliating, with participants coerced into admitting fabricated wrongdoings or exaggerated offenses under the guise of self-improvement. And all of this was designed to break the individual's sense of autonomy and reinforce that absolute loyalty to Scientology. If you dissent, if you say anything negative about this organization, you will be punished. You will be subjected to abuse, and all of the things that you're ashamed of will come to the surface, even if you didn't even do them, even if you just thought about doing them and didn't do any wrong at all. Imagine being afraid of your own intrusive thoughts, which I already am, but imagine being so afraid of your own intrusive thoughts that you literally stay in a cult for years and years and years, because what if they force you to tell people about those thoughts or have you make up something that you didn't even do? It's just like, it is scary. It's like someone reading your journal. It's violating. And then once they find out these things that you're ashamed of, they publicly shame you and then verbally abuse you. So obviously everyone around you is like, I don't want that to happen to me. Now, if that isn't scary and horrifying enough, I want to share some actual real survivor testimonies. And I'm going to butcher this name. I'm so sorry. I'm really bad at pronunciation. But Mary Tabayonan, who spent years in the RPF, described her experience as literal spiritual imprisonment. She recounted that the program's combination of physical exhaustion, isolation, and psychological manipulation left her feeling totally hopeless and powerless. Members in the RPF were often stripped of their sense of identity, and then they would become entirely dependent to the organization for validation and purpose. Now, we've talked about Marc Headley. He was that former Sea Org member. He was higher up, and he was actually able to avoid this punishment, but he witnessed the RPF operations and even compared it to a prison system. He recounted seeing individuals assigned to the program become shells of their former selves, worn down by the relentless demands and dehumanizing conditions. So, when confronted with how dangerous this practice is, do you think that the representatives for the Church of Scientology took any accountability? Absolutely not. The church maintains that participation in the RPF is entirely voluntary and describes it as a spiritual rehabilitation program designed to help members regain their focus and commitment. Obviously, this claim has been challenged by many, many people. And obviously, the RPF has faced widespread criticism from even human rights organizations. They argue that it violates basic human rights and labor standards. The program's combination of that forced labor, isolation, and coercion has led many people to label it as an abusive mechanism of control rather than like a genuine rehabilitation effort. So as we get to the conclusion of this video, I'm sure you're angry and fuming and concerned and heartbroken for a lot of the members of this group and the survivors, but there are still some other controversies that the Sea Org experienced over the years that I want to share. So there have been numerous legal battles and public scandals. Many of these issues revolve around those allegations of labor violation and human rights abuses, and obviously it being a cult. Now, the Headleys actually filed a lawsuit in 2009 accusing the Church of Scientology of forced labor and even human trafficking. Claire shared detailed accounts of her life with work exceeding 100 hours a week and an environment of total control. She described the mental toll of her time in the Sea Org. She said she felt physically and psychologically exhausted. And this fear and this constant concern about being punished and the overworking, it just led her to feel so trapped in this weird cycle of confession and punishment. So her decision to leave was really, really difficult because she still had people in the cult that she loved, but she was forced to completely disconnect from all of them. But it's people like her who are brave enough to speak out and actually have a public lawsuit brought to the surface because it brings significant attention to the Sea Org's practices. Even though this case was ultimately dismissed on jurisdictional grounds, unfortunately, it did highlight all of those systemic issues within the organizations, like lack of fair wages, coercion, and psychological abuse. And I just want us all to remember that this is something incredibly brave that Claire did. This act inspired others to come forward, so it added to the growing body of evidence against the Sea Org. So obviously, it's incredibly daunting and risky to try to escape the Sea Org. So how does it happen? What are some of the stories? Despite these challenges and these barriers, some members do manage to escape, but it's often in a very dramatic fashion. For example, Marc Headley recounted fleeing a Sea Org facility on a motorcycle while being pursued by church security. He described how he had to plan his escape carefully, waiting for a perfect moment when security was distracted before he could make his move. His escape marked the beginning of a really difficult but liberating journey for him because he had to rebuild his life outside of the confines of Scientology. Valerie Haney is another former member, described escaping from Gold Base by hiding in the trunk of a car. So after years of planning an escape, she saw her opportunity and took it, knowing that being caught could result in severe punishment. And Haney later used her experiences to speak out publicly against the abuses she endured. And this just really highlights the length that individuals have to go to in order to leave. Hannah Whitfield shared about her escape. She literally escaped from a ship in the middle of the night. With little more than the clothes on her back, she fled to the nearest port, and was so determined to leave the organization despite that fear of retaliation. And her courage, doing something so difficult and scary, was a massive turning point in her life. It empowered her, and it allowed her to become an outspoken critic of Scientology's practices. But the consequences of leaving can be severe. If you're considered an SP or a suppressive person, you are totally excommunicated from Scientology. It doesn't matter if your friend is in the church, your child is in the church, your parent is still in the church. You are not allowed to speak to them. You might have no support. We talked a little bit about fair game, which is basically when Scientology might even hire people to harass you, surveil you, send you legal threats, and have total smear campaigns directed at you if you try to leave. But despite all these challenges, many former members describe a deep sense of relief and freedom upon escaping. And this fear, this trauma only shows you how resilient and determined they had to be to break free. Defectors like Mike Rinder and Leah Remini have used their platforms to expose the inner workings of the Sea Org and Scientology and advocate for those still trapped within its confines. I highly recommend, please, go support these survivors' works, whether it's a series, it's a television show, it's a memoir. I will try to leave as many links to resources in the description box down below, because the more that we can support their work, the more they'll be able to do it, the more they will be able to spread their message, the more awareness will happen. And I think that is just so, so vitally important. And you get to hear real life accounts and stories. And I think empathy is something that's like really missing from the social sphere right now. It's like we've been exposed, or we're having this realization right now, or at least I am, that like it's really special to be empathetic. But I also believe that empathy is something that can be built upon, or someone can grow into, even if they don't seem like the most empathetic person. And I really believe that hearing these stories, watching people tell their story really humanizes the situation, and it forces us to connect to them more. So please go support these survivors. Any survivor of any cult I've ever mentioned on this channel, please support their work, whether it's a YouTube channel, like Jessie Hersey has a YouTube channel, whether it's Jenna Miscavige's Hill's YouTube channel, or a book, please go support them. It would mean a lot to me, and I'm sure it would mean a lot to them. So what do you think about Scientology and the Sea Org and all of this? Like, have you watched every piece of documented story on this? Because this was one of the first cults where I was just like, whoa, I need to know every single thing about this. And I know for a fact I have barely scratched the surface yet again. So if there's an aspect of Scientology you'd want me to jump into, or I would love to talk to some survivors or interview them or just hear their story anonymously. So if you have a story of yourself or a loved one in Scientology, please feel free to email me at letfresharin@gmail.com, and I would love to share your story totally anonymously. I really want to jump back into my Survivor Story series. There's so much I'm feeling inspired to do again. Like I mentioned at the beginning of my video, I was feeling a little bit stale, like I couldn't fully express myself for fear of being judged. And I just feel like there are some people that wear their hate and their judgment so publicly and openly. And I'm just kind of like, you know what? If y'all are going to be terrible, then I can express my opinion and call out your terrible behavior. Gosh. Anyways, y'all, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Thank you guys so much. Bye.